Imagine a silence so profound it swallows the very air around you. Not the peaceful hush of a sleeping forest, but a heavy, suffocating stillness that presses against your eardrums. A silence that screams without a sound. It's in this void, this absolute absence of light and sound, that our story begins. Forget the clock for a moment. Erase the calendar. Tonight, there are no anchors to time. Only the raw, visceral sensation of being utterly and completely alone in the darkness. Think about trust. It's a fragile thing, isn't it? A delicate web woven from shared moments, whispered secrets, and unwavering belief. We offer it freely, sometimes cautiously, to those we hold closest. A partner, a friend, a family member, the pillars of our lives. The ones we believe would never let us fall. But what happens when that trust is not just broken, but brutally shattered? What happens when the very person you've placed your faith in becomes the architect of your deepest nightmare? Our story centers around a woman named Eleanor. On the surface, her life seemed like a carefully composed melody of contentment. At 38, she possessed a quiet strength, a gentle smile that hinted at a playful spirit beneath a veneer of calm. She lived in a charming, slightly secluded Victorian house nestled amidst the rolling hills of upstate New York. The kind of place where sunlight dappled through ancient trees and the only sounds at night were the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. To the outside world, Eleanor was living a peaceful existence. She shared this idyllic life with her husband, Julian. He was her rock, the steady presence in her world. They had met at a local bookstore, their hands brushing as they both reached for the same first edition. It was, as they say, a meet-cute straight out of a romantic comedy. Julian, a charismatic architect with a sharp wit and kind eyes, had swept Eleanor off her feet. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared passions, long walks in the autumn woods, cozy evenings by the fireplace discussing literature, and dreams whispered into the quiet of the night. 5 years into their marriage, they still seemed deeply in love, the comfortable silence between them speaking volumes of their shared history and affection. But beneath the polished surface of their seemingly perfect life, unseen cracks were beginning to appear. Tiny fissures at first, almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in a delicate piece of porcelain. Eleanor had started noticing subtle shifts in Julian's behavior. A fleeting shadow that would cross his face when she mentioned a particular friend. A slight hesitation before answering a simple question. A new protectiveness over his phone. Individually, these instances were easily dismissed, attributed to stress at work or a momentary preoccupation. But collectively, they began to form a disquieting pattern in Eleanor's mind, a faint discord in their once harmonious melody. She tried to broach the subject gently, her words carefully chosen, hesitant. But Julian would always have a plausible explanation, delivered with such sincerity that Eleanor would find herself questioning her own perceptions, wondering if she was simply being overly sensitive. "Work has been crazy, Elle," he'd say, his brow furrowed with what seemed like genuine concern. "You know how demanding Mr. Henderson can be. It takes its toll." And Eleanor, wanting to believe him, wanting to preserve the image of the man she loved, would let it go. There was also the matter of Julian's increasingly secretive phone calls. He would often step out onto the porch or into another room to take them, his voice lowered, his responses vague when Eleanor inquired who had called. He'd attribute it to confidential client matters, something he couldn't discuss. Eleanor understood the need for professional discretion, but the frequency and furtiveness of these calls chipped away at her sense of security. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor was tidying up Julian's study while he was out at a site meeting. She stumbled upon a small, locked wooden box tucked away in the back of a drawer. Curiosity piqued. She gently tried to open it, but the lock held firm. She knew it was wrong to pry, to invade Julian's privacy, but a nagging feeling, an intuition she couldn't ignore, compelled her. Later that evening, while Julian was showering, Eleanor found the small, tarnished key tucked away in his wallet. Her heart pounded in her chest as she retrieved the box and carefully unlocked it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were not the expected personal letters or old photographs. Instead, Eleanor found a collection of newspaper clippings, all detailing the unsolved disappearances of young women in the surrounding counties over the past few years. Each article featured a photograph of the missing woman, their smiling faces now frozen in time, their fates unknown. A cold dread washed over Eleanor as she scanned the articles, her breath catching in her throat. What was Julian doing with these? Why would he keep such morbid reminders? As she delved deeper into the box, she found a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was familiar. Eleanor racked her brain trying to place it, and then it hit her. It was identical to the one her childhood friend, Sarah, had always carried with her, a cherished keepsake she had lost shortly before she disappeared 5 years ago. A wave of nausea washed over Eleanor. The pieces started to click into place, forming a terrifying picture she didn't want to believe. Just then, she heard the bathroom door open. Julian's footsteps approached the study. Panic seized Eleanor. She quickly shoved the clippings and the wooden bird back into the box, locked it, and placed it back in the drawer, her hands trembling. She barely managed to compose herself before Julian walked in, a towel slung around his neck, a faint mist of steam still clinging to his hair. He smiled at her, that familiar, reassuring smile that now seemed to carry a sinister undercurrent. "Everything all right, love?" he asked, his eyes perhaps a little too sharp, a little too watchful. Eleanor forced a smile in return, her voice betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. "Just looking for a book," she said, her gaze fixed on a nearby shelf. But the seed of doubt had been sown. The comfortable silence between them had now become a wall of unspoken questions and growing fear. Eleanor knew, with a chilling certainty, that the man she had married, the man she thought she knew, was hiding something dark, something terrifying. And the contents of that small wooden box were just the beginning of a nightmare she could never have imagined. The trust she had so freely given had been betrayed in the most profound and unsettling way, setting in motion a chain of events that would soon plunge her into unimaginable darkness. The days that followed were shrouded in a suffocating tension that only Eleanor seemed to feel. Julian carried on as if nothing had changed, his demeanor as charming and attentive as ever. He would ask about her day, make her coffee in the morning, and suggest their usual weekend activities. But for Eleanor, every gesture, every word, was now filtered through a lens of suspicion and fear. The smiling facade had cracked, revealing a glimpse of something cold and unknown beneath. Sleep offered little respite. Eleanor's nights were haunted by fragmented images, the smiling faces of the missing women, the cold, impersonal text of the newspaper clippings, the weight of the wooden bird in her hand. She would often wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the silence of the house amplifying her growing anxiety. She knew she had to be careful. Confronting Julian directly without concrete proof could be dangerous. She needed to gather more information to understand the connection between Julian and those missing women, especially Sarah. The thought of her childhood friend, vibrant and full of life, possibly having been a victim of the man she shared her bed with, was almost unbearable. Eleanor started subtly investigating. She spent hours online, poring over news archives, looking for any connections between Julian and the disappearances. She paid closer attention to his conversations, his comings and goings, noticing details she had previously overlooked. She realized that his site meetings often coincided with the dates of some of the disappearances, and the areas where the women had last been seen were not far from some of Julian's recent architectural projects. One evening, while Julian was at his weekly poker game with his friends, Eleanor decided to take another look at the locked box. This time, she was more methodical. She carefully examined the newspaper clippings, noting the dates, locations, and any recurring details mentioned in the articles. She also scrutinized the wooden bird, searching for any unique markings or inscriptions that might link it definitively to Sarah. On the bottom, almost hidden from view, she found a tiny, hand-carved initial, S. The confirmation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. There was no longer any room for doubt. Julian was connected to Sarah's disappearance, and likely to the others as well. The man she loved, The man she had built a life with was potentially a monster. The realization sent a shiver of terror down her spine. But beneath the fear, a steely resolve began to form. She wouldn't be a victim. She would find out the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. As she was putting the box back, she noticed something else tucked away in the drawer behind it. It was a small, worn, leather-bound journal. Her heart pounded as she carefully pulled it out. The pages were filled with Julian's handwriting, but not the neat, organized script she was used to seeing in his architectural notes. This was different. The words were erratic, filled with dark musings, obsessive thoughts, and disturbing fantasies. As Eleanor read further, she found passages that hinted at a twisted sense of power, a desire to control and possess, and a chilling detachment from the consequences of his actions. The journal was a window into a mind she had never known, a terrifying landscape of darkness and delusion. It didn't explicitly confess to the disappearances, but the implications were horrifyingly clear. Eleanor felt a wave of revulsion wash over her. How could she have been so blind? How could she have shared her life, her intimacy, with someone capable of such monstrous thoughts? Suddenly, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Julian was home. Panic flared within her. She quickly tucked the journal under her sweater and placed the locked box back in the drawer, just as she had found it. She barely made it back to the living room and sat down on the sofa, trying to appear calm, when Julian walked in, a jovial smile on his face. "Rough night at the tables," he said, ruffling his hair. "Lost a bit more than I intended." Eleanor forced a weak smile. "Oh, that's too bad, honey." He came over and sat beside her, placing an arm around her shoulders. Eleanor flinched inwardly at his touch, the casual intimacy now feeling repulsive. "But it's good to be home," he said, pulling her closer. "What have you been up to?" "Just reading," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. She knew she couldn't keep up this charade for long. The weight of the secrets she now carried was crushing her. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor continued her secret investigation, piecing together fragments of information, trying to build a solid case against Julian. She started documenting his suspicious activities, noting down times, dates, and any relevant details. She even managed to discreetly take photos of some of the more disturbing entries in his journal. The emotional toll was immense. She was living a double life, pretending to be the loving wife while secretly fearing the man she shared her home with. The isolation was suffocating. She couldn't confide in anyone, afraid of putting them, and herself, in danger. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor received a call from a detective working on the cold case files of the missing women. She had anonymously submitted a tip, mentioning Julian's name and his potential connection to Sarah. The detective, a seasoned but weary woman named Detective Miller, agreed to meet with Eleanor. During their clandestine meeting at a quiet coffee shop, Eleanor shared her suspicions and the little evidence she had gathered: the newspaper clippings, the wooden bird, and the disturbing excerpts from Julian's journal. Detective Miller listened intently, her expression grim. She confirmed that Sarah's disappearance had always been a particularly troubling case, with no solid leads until now. The wooden bird, if indeed Sarah's, could be a crucial piece of evidence. Detective Miller cautioned Eleanor to be careful. If Julian was involved, he could be dangerous. She advised Eleanor not to confront him directly and promised to launch a discreet investigation. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. Someone believed her. Someone was going to help. But Julian, it seemed, was growing suspicious. He had started asking more pointed questions, noticing Eleanor's subtle changes in behavior. He seemed more watchful, his eyes lingering on her a moment too long, his questions laced with a subtle undercurrent of suspicion. The walls were closing in. Eleanor knew she was running out of time. The secrets had been partially revealed, and the tension in their home was reaching a breaking point. A confrontation was inevitable, and Eleanor feared what Julian might do when he realized she knew the truth. The idyllic life she once knew had completely shattered, replaced by a chilling reality where the man she trusted most was becoming her greatest threat. The confrontation began subtly, a creeping unease that permeated the air in their home. Julian started making veiled comments, little barbs disguised as concern. "You seem distracted lately, Eleanor. Everything all right?" he'd ask, his eyes holding a glint that no longer seemed kind. Or, "You've been spending a lot of time out. Where have you been going?" Eleanor tried to remain calm, offering vague explanations, but she could feel his suspicion growing with each passing day. The comfortable silence that once defined their relationship had been replaced by a tense, watchful quiet. She knew it was only a matter of time before the dam broke. One evening, as Eleanor was preparing dinner, Julian walked into the kitchen holding the locked wooden box. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "What's this?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. She feigned ignorance. "What's what, Julian?" He held up the box. "Don't play coy with me, Eleanor. I found this hidden in my study. Explain." She knew denial was futile. She took a deep breath, trying to control her trembling hands. I found it a while ago," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "I was curious." "Curious?" he scoffed. "And what exactly were you curious about?" Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then decided to reveal a part of what she knew, hoping to gauge his reaction. "There were newspaper clippings inside," she said, her gaze fixed on his face. "About the missing women." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Julian's features, but he quickly masked it with an expression of feigned confusion. "Missing women? What would I have those for?" "And a wooden bird," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "One that looked exactly like Sarah's." Julian's composure finally began to crack. A muscle twitched in his jaw, and his eyes narrowed. "Sarah? What are you implying, Eleanor?" "I'm implying that you knew Sarah," she said, her voice now firm. "And I'm implying that you know more about her disappearance, and the others, than you're letting on." A dangerous glint entered Julian's eyes. The charming facade had completely vanished, replaced by something dark and menacing. "You've been snooping around, haven't you?" he said, his voice laced with anger. "Going through my things." "I needed to know the truth, Julian," Eleanor retorted, her fear momentarily overshadowed by a surge of righteous anger. "I needed to understand the secrets you've been keeping." The argument escalated quickly. Julian's denials became more vehement, his accusations more aggressive. He tried to gaslight Eleanor, telling her she was being paranoid, that her imagination was running wild. But Eleanor stood her ground, fueled by the knowledge she had uncovered and the memory of Sarah. In the heat of the argument, Eleanor blurted out, "I read your journal, Julian." The effect was immediate and chilling. Julian froze, his face paling. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a look of cold, calculating fury. You read my journal?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. In that moment, Eleanor knew she had crossed a line. The pretense was over. Julian no longer needed to maintain the charade of the loving husband. The monster beneath the surface had been fully revealed. "Yes, I did," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but resolute. "And I know what you are." A sinister smile spread across Julian's face. "Do you now?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "And what exactly do you think I am, Eleanor?" What followed was a chilling confession. In a calm, almost detached manner, Julian admitted to everything. He spoke of his twisted desires, his need to control, his fascination with the vulnerability of others. He confessed to meeting Sarah that day 5 years ago, to luring her to a secluded spot, and to burying her alive in a fit of rage after she rejected his advances. He recounted the other disappearances with a chilling lack of remorse, each story more horrifying than the last. Eleanor listened in stunned silence, her mind reeling in disbelief and terror. The man she had loved, the man she had shared her life with, was a cold-blooded killer. And now she knew his secret. As Julian finished his confession, his gaze locked onto Eleanor. "And now you know too much, my dear," he said, his voice laced with a chilling finality. Eleanor knew her life was in grave danger. She had to escape. But as she turned to flee, Julian grabbed her, his grip surprisingly strong. A struggle ensued, a desperate fight for survival in the confines of their once loving home. During the struggle, Eleanor managed to knock a heavy object off a nearby shelf. It struck Julian on the head, momentarily stunning him. Seizing the opportunity, Eleanor ran, her heart pounding in her chest, fear giving her a surge of adrenaline. She burst out of the house and into the darkness of the night, the sound of Julian's enraged shouts echoing behind her. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to get away, to find someone who could help her. She ran blindly through the woods, the branches whipping at her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear Julian crashing through the underbrush behind her, his pursuit relentless. Just as she thought he was about to catch her, Eleanor stumbled upon an old, abandoned shed. She quickly ducked inside, hoping it would provide a temporary hiding place. The shed was dark and damp, filled with the musty smell of decay. She huddled in a corner, listening intently for any sign of Julian. Suddenly, the shed door creaked open. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Julian stood silhouetted in the doorway, a menacing figure in the dim moonlight. He had found her. "Nowhere left to run, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low growl. Eleanor knew this was it. Her life was about to end. But then, in a desperate act of self-preservation, she remembered something she had seen in Julian's journal, a passage about an isolated root cellar behind the shed, a place he had described as the perfect hiding spot, a place where no one would ever find you. As Julian lunged towards her, Eleanor dodged his grasp and scrambled towards the back of the shed. She fumbled in the darkness, her hand brushing against something cold and metallic, a rusty shovel. Without hesitation, she swung it blindly, connecting with Julian's head with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, momentarily disoriented. Eleanor didn't waste a second. She pushed past him, burst out of the shed, and ran towards the back of the property, desperately searching for the root cellar. She found it hidden beneath a camouflaged trapdoor, almost invisible in the darkness. With trembling hands, she managed to lift it open and plunged inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind her just as she heard Julian's footsteps approaching. She found herself in a small, dark, and damp space. The air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. She could hear Julian shouting her name from above, his voice filled with rage. Eleanor huddled in the darkness, her heart pounding, listening to Julian's frantic search. She knew this was only a temporary reprieve. He wouldn't give up. He knew she knew his secrets, and he wouldn't rest until she was silenced forever. Then, she remembered another chilling detail from Julian's journal, a passage describing how he had once used the root cellar to temporarily hold one of his victims before burying them alive. A wave of terror washed over Eleanor. Was this to be her fate too? Buried alive by the man she had once loved and trusted? The horrifying irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. The secrets had been revealed, the climax reached, but for Eleanor, the nightmare was far from over. She was trapped, alone, and at the mercy of a monster she had unknowingly married. The darkness in the root cellar was absolute, broken only by the faint sounds of Julian's frustrated shouts above. Eleanor huddled deeper into the cold, damp earth, the fear a tangible weight pressing down on her. She knew her time was limited. Julian would eventually find a way in. Panic began to set in. The air was thick and suffocating, and the smell of damp soil and decay filled her nostrils. She thought of Sarah, trapped and terrified, perhaps in a similar place, before her final, horrifying fate. The thought fueled a desperate surge of determination within Eleanor. She wouldn't let Julian win. She wouldn't become another forgotten victim. Using the faint light filtering through cracks in the trapdoor, Eleanor began to explore her prison. It was a small, cramped space, barely large enough to stand in. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, and the floor was damp earth. In one corner, she found a pile of discarded gardening tools, a broken rake, a rusty hoe, and a shovel. Her heart leaped. The shovel. It was her only chance. Meanwhile, above, Julian was growing increasingly frantic. He had searched the entire property, but Eleanor was nowhere to be found. He knew she had to be hiding somewhere close, and then it dawned on him, the root cellar. He had almost forgotten about it, a relic from the property's past. He rushed back to the shed, his mind racing. He remembered the heavy trapdoor, cleverly disguised. It would take some effort to open it from the outside, but he was determined. He grabbed a heavy rock from the shed and returned to the camouflaged entrance. Below, Eleanor could hear muffled sounds above her, heavy thuds and scraping noises. She knew Julian was trying to get in. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, she grabbed the shovel and positioned herself near the trapdoor, her hands trembling but her resolve firm. The sounds above grew louder, more insistent. Then, with a splintering crack, a section of the trapdoor gave way. A sliver of light pierced the darkness, followed by Julian's menacing face peering down into the cellar. "I know you're down there, Eleanor," he snarled. "Come out. It will be easier for both of us." Eleanor remained silent, clutching the shovel tightly. "Fine," Julian said, his voice laced with anger. "Have it your way." He began to widen the opening, tearing away the damaged wood. Eleanor knew she had to act fast. As Julian's head and shoulders appeared through the opening, she swung the shovel with all her might, striking him squarely in the face. Julian roared in pain and surprise, recoiling momentarily. Eleanor seized the opportunity. She scrambled towards the damaged section of the trapdoor and, with a desperate heave, managed to push it open wider. It wasn't a large opening, but it was enough. She squeezed through the narrow gap, scraping her skin and tearing her clothes, and burst out into the night air. Julian, still stunned and bleeding, was struggling to get through the opening himself. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She ran as fast as she could, away from the shed, away from the root cellar, away from the monster who had held her captive. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached, until she couldn't run anymore. Finally, she stumbled onto a quiet country road. Exhausted and terrified, she flagged down a passing car. The elderly couple inside were shocked by her disheveled appearance and her frantic story. They immediately called the police. The authorities arrived quickly, sirens wailing in the distance. Eleanor recounted her harrowing ordeal, her voice still trembling with fear. She led them back to the property, where they found Julian, unconscious but alive, near the root cellar. The subsequent investigation revealed the full extent of Julian's crimes. The evidence Eleanor had gathered, along with the items found in the root cellar and Julian's confession, painted a damning picture. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, murder, and attempted murder. The trial was a media sensation. The details of Julian's double life, his chillingly calm confessions, and Eleanor's courageous escape captivated the nation. Justice was eventually served, and Julian was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Eleanor's ordeal had a profound impact on her life. The trust she had once held so dearly had been shattered, replaced by a deep-seated wariness. The idyllic life she had built with Julian was gone, replaced by the haunting memories of his betrayal and her terrifying escape. She eventually moved away from the Victorian house, seeking solace and a fresh start in a new town. It took time, but with the help of therapy and the support of friends and family, Eleanor slowly began to heal. The scars of her experience would always remain, but she refused to let them define her. She had faced unimaginable darkness and emerged a survivor, her spirit unbroken. The story of Eleanor serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. It underscores the fragility of trust and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we least suspect, those we have welcomed into our hearts and homes. And as we close this chapter, we are left with a lingering sense of unease, a haunting echo of the terror Eleanor endured. It serves as a stark warning. Be vigilant, trust your instincts, and remember that appearances can often be deceiving. The ones you trust the most might be hiding the darkest secrets. Thank you for listening to this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories of mystery, suspense, and survival, Please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next upload. Your support helps us bring you more gripping narratives. We appreciate you being a part of our community. Until next time, stay safe and keep looking over your shoulder.